Andrew Weissmann, take me through what you write today in the New York Times.
Sure. The key thing that I do is really take on this issue of how much should Jack Smith be speaking publicly. Obviously, I worked for Robert Mueller. He's famously known for being reticent with respect to the press. I quote a line that he used all the time, which is, if you live by the press, you die by the press. And I contrast that with, obviously, Ken Starr, who was criticized, I think rightly, for overspeaking and oversharing. And then I give another example of a third special counsel who investigated a sitting or former president, and that is Archibald Cox in the Watergate years. And the key thing that I talk about is that it's not necessary to be absolutely silent. If you do that, you leave the field to Donald Trump and his allies to really spin the way in which the special counsel is viewed and the work of the special counsel. And it's going to be really important here, if there is a charge, for the public to understand what it is that the special counsel is doing and why there's a charge. And a really good example, I think, of where the special counsel, if he does decide to charge, could speak out, is to explain how the case against Donald Trump is completely called for by prior Department of Justice cases. In other words, that it is actually following the rule of law to charge him because others who did similar things or lesser crimes have been charged as well, so that he is being treated no better or worse than anyone else.
Andrew, let me read from what I think is that section. It's worth noting that the Justice Department rules would not prohibit Mr. Smith discussing procedural issues and, as the investigations come to fruition, explaining why any potential charges are consistent with past cases. In other words, if there is an indictment, he could explain why Trump would be treated no better or worse than individuals who've been charged with similar crimes. As we proceed along this course, where an indictment of the former president seems increasingly likely, the press maelstrom will certainly intensify. Trump and his allies are already working to shape the press narrative, as is their right, and as they have done in the past. A prosecutor need not and should not stay entirely mute. And let me just, for our viewers who may not know where to find that right-wing you-know-what storm, let me just show some of what it sounds like. This is Trump and the usual suspects, Cruz and Jordan, maligning the newly appointed special counsel.
This horrendous abuse of power is the latest in a long series of witch hunts. It started a long time ago.
This latest announcement that they are preparing to use the criminal process to try to attack Donald Trump. Look, banana republics do this. You see this, sadly, in places that don't respect rule of law.
If that's not a political Justice Department, I don't know what is. So this is why we're going to look into this issue, and we're going to get to the bottom of everything they've been doing at the politicized DOJ.
So banana republics are calling, Andrew, and they want their coup plots back. But Ted Cruz's projection aside, it sort of proves your point, right? I mean, the right is going to throw all sorts of manufactured outrage into the gears, and it's worked for Trump before. So, what is there something imminent that could be an example of this new special counsel speaking to his process?
Right now, I'd say the answer is no, because Jack is still overseas and he needs to obviously come back here, get his feet on the ground and his team in order. But I do think that certainly sort of explaining the team, the process could be done. I think it's going to be important very much in the way that Merrick Garland gave a press conference when there was a huge brouhaha over the Mar-a-Lago search warrant. It was in some ways gave the ability for the public to see Merrick Garland. He's a name and he's somebody who we internally all know. And if you're in Washington, you know, but it's not somebody who the public knows. And I think it's going to be important for Jack, even if he doesn't say all that much at the outset, I think it's going to be important for the public to see him. And I give as an example, Archibald Cox. He gave a press conference in connection with a very important decision that he made about seeking the Nixon tapes and not getting just a transcript, a selected transcript from the president. And he did that on television. Now, we're all on television, and in part, we know that is an important way to communicate. And Archibald Cox could have done all of that in a legal brief. But in this day and age, that's not really, frankly, going to cut it in terms of getting your message out and being heard, and also allowing the public to see who you are, and for them, the public, to make up their minds about whether they think the person is acting well within the scope of their discretion. So I just think we should borrow a page from, for instance, the January 6th committee that has been very adept about learning how to get its message out in a way that is understandable to the American public.
Andrew Weissmann, with the exception really of yourself, the Mueller investigation had no storytellers, and you didn't become one until after you had left, and I believe until after it was done. Can you concede, or do you acknowledge that that was detrimental to the work product of the Mueller probe in its entirety?
I do. I mean, so in the New York Times piece, as well as in my book, I write about that I think that was a missed opportunity. I think that there is an educational function of the special counsel that needs to be acknowledged and accepted. It's important, though, to remember there are limits. Archibald Cox mentioned them. Attorney General Merrick Garland has mentioned them. You don't want to be like James Comey. You don't want to give your personal opinion about the guilt or innocence of somebody who has not been charged. There are things that you really can't say. But I do think that it is important to understand that educational role. And if we do go down this uncharted course of having a former president being charged, I think the public is going to be entitled to know more about the department's reasoning than would happen in a normal case. And I think that there's nothing about the department rules that prohibit it. And I think it would be greatly in the public service to have that kind of communication so people can understand why such action was taken.
All right, so you can't make any of this up, but the man who literally put his boot on the neck of the Mueller probe and Mr. Mueller himself in its final weeks of existing says that DOJ probably has enough to indict already. Mike Schmidt, let me show this to you. This is Bill Barr.
If the Department of Justice can show that these were indeed very sensitive documents, which I think they probably were, and also show that the president consciously was involved in misleading the department, deceiving the government, and playing games after he had received the subpoena for the documents, those are serious charges.
That's a serious
That's serious.
That's a serious
well,
enough crime.
I said that I personally think that they probably have the basis for legitimately indicting the president. I don't know. I'm speculating.
You're speculating, yeah.
But given what's gone on, I think they probably have the evidence that would check the box. They have the case.
Do you think they will?
I think it's becoming increasingly more likely.
So, Mike, if Bill Barr's standard is evidence that they were sensitive documents and evidence that the president was consciously involved in misleading the department, I believe DOJ has already, in filings that have been released to the public, made clear that they have those two pieces of evidence. Is Bill Barr saying something here to Trump or to the right that an indictment of Trump is imminent?
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what Bill Barr knows. And it's interesting to see Bill Barr talk about Donald Trump's conduct the way that he did, because it's certainly through a different lens than when he was Attorney General. And I'm sure it's much easier to sit there as a commentator in an interview like that and offer your opinion than, have to be Garland and decide whether the, charging a former president of the United States who may likely be the front runner at a point of decision on whether to bring charges, being the front runner of the Republican Party, whether to go forward with that extraordinary decision of whether to charge. Barr had an op-ed today, or a version of an op-ed, in the New York Post. It sort of follows a pattern of people when they break with Trump, they sort of break hard, and they talk about how shocked they are by Trump's behavior when, certainly they were witness to some of it when they were there. So I'm not sure what to make of Barr. And at the end of the day, Barr sort of doesn't matter. It matters what Garland, what's in Garland's head. Does Garland think that he can go forward with this monumentous decision if, Smith and the prosecutors believe that there's enough to do it? So I'm not really sure.